And welcome to Hannity. Busy news night. That caravan everybody said would never get here, they are now, as we speak, at our southern border. Now, the first 3,000 migrants have already arrived south of San Diego. Thousands more still on their way. And the Mexican border city of Tijuana, they are in crisis mode tonight. Tensions are running high. The migrants are now stuck between our reinforced border and a Mexican city that wants them gone. And coming up, we'll bring you the very latest on what is now a serious developing situation. Also, we'll have an update on the Mueller witch hunt. Could it finally be in its final days? It's beginning to look like it. And the White House just unveiled new rules for reporter conduct that would require, people like Jim Acosta, other so-called journalists, act like professional adults. But don't hold your breath. The president may have outsmarted everybody in all this, and I'll explain. And also tonight, the election in Florida is finally officially over. There's a sore loser in Georgia who lost but doesn't want to kind of fully admit it. And we are continuing tonight to monitor the devastating wildfires in California tonight, a tragedy that could have and should have been prevented. Sit tight. A lot of news this Monday. We start with our breaking news opening monologue. All right, tonight the crisis on our southern border is growing more serious. 3,000 migrants now have already arrived south of California's border, a number that is expected now to swell to more than 10,000. Tensions are now escalating in Tijuana, Mexico, where thousands have poured in, straining local resources and fueling conflict. And what the mayor there is calling a migrant tsunami that could last 6 months. Now, Mexican nationals are taken to the streets. They are standing up for their own borders and sovereignty, and they're telling the caravan to go home. And some are even literally backing and quoting President Trump. Take a look at this.
Trump tenía la razón, es una invasión. Lo que dijo Donald Trump es verdad, es una invasión. Esto es lo que es, y vienen más disque caravanas.
Donald Trump was right. It's an invasion. Now, for years on this program, I've pointed out the huge, massive hypocrisy. Mexico always wanting to lecture America on the issue of immigration when they jailed or returned people that entered their country immediately. There was no, quote, due process. They were out or sent to jail. And I've been saying that while the vast majority of people coming here, I get it, I understand it, you understand it, they want a better life for themselves, their kids, their grandkids. The problem is they've not been vetted. No background checks, no knowledge of any criminal history they may have. This unchecked, unvetted mass migration would be reckless to American national security. That's a threat. And just today, the Department of Homeland Security in this country confirmed to Fox News they have now identified more than 500 criminals that are traveling with the caravan flow, just mixing in, adding that the vast majority in the caravan are able-bodied males, not women and children. And often women and children are purposely put in front just for the cameras. And by the way, now, thankfully, the president is following through on his promise to increase border security. Promise made, promise kept. He tweeted out a picture of the revamped barbed wire fence near San Diego, vowing that there will be no, quote, climbers anymore under our administration. But remember, the situation would be so much different for everybody, so much safer for everybody if we had a law and people would respect our sovereignty and our borders and our rule of law. It would be safer for everybody on both sides. And of course, that wall can have a big door, as the president has often said. America can and should accept immigrants, but we have to vet anybody and everyone who wants to come to this country. And we'll have more on this serious situation that's developing all throughout the hour. But first, the Mueller witch hunt. The left, the corrupt media, they might soon be in need of a new conspiracy theory to obsess over, because the probe could now be entering its final days. It now appears there will be no in-person interview between President Trump, Robert Mueller, or his team of left-wing lawyers. That would mean no perjury trap, no subpoena, no battle before the Supreme Court, thankfully. Instead, the president will submit written answers to the special counsel. We expect sometime this week, maybe even as early as tomorrow. Now, of course, if Mueller's investigation really is a probe into Russia collusion, all of his questions we know have already been answered. We know that in multiple interviews, President Trump has consistently denied any collusion or conspiracy with Russia. We know the president consistently denied any knowledge of any collusion within his campaign. We know the president has flatly denied any election coordination with Russia whatsoever. And to this day, there's no evidence. We know that the convictions of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and campaign aide George Papadopoulos had nothing to do with collusion. We know the same about Michael Cohen. We know that Paul Manafort's crimes have nothing to do with collusion. And meanwhile, there are still major questions surrounding real instances of collusion that Robert Mueller and the media in this country have ignored. Why isn't Robert Mueller investigating the Clinton bought and paid for, phony, debunked Russian dossier? Why didn't the special counsel probe the Russian lies found in Steele's so-called research, which, by the way, Clinton paid for? Why isn't Mueller investigating the Pfizer fraud surrounding the grossly dishonest use of those Russian lies? Or that even the author of the lies, Steele himself, said, "Oh, I have no idea if it's true." Now, why isn't he investigating the coordinated effort by the deep state, people at the top levels of power within our government, the Obama government, Democratic Party, leaking Russian lies to the American people so that they could influence voters right before an election? Remember, they had a media leak strategy later. What about the struck page insurance policy? Why is there literally no investigation into any of that by the special counsel whose main mandate was to look into Russia collusion? And the simple answer is it has been a singularly focused witch hunt only on Donald Trump, carried out by a partisan team of investigators who have wanted first him not to win the presidency, but then discredit and delegitimize the presidency of Donald Trump and, of course, stop his agenda. Over the weekend, the president had this to say about the ongoing probe. Let's take a look.
All these people that say, I'm going to end the investigation, they've been saying that now for, how long has this witch hunt gone on? It's gone on for what?
Since May of 17.
Okay, but how long have I been looked at? You know when I've been looked at?
Since
from the
July
day
of 2016.
From the day I announced, I was looked at as a candidate with nothing, no proof, with phony people like McCabe and Strzok and his lover. You had Lisa Page, his lover. These people were looking at me. They wanted an insurance policy just in case I won or Hillary lost. And this was the insurance policy. It's a scam. There was no collusion whatsoever, and the whole thing is a scam.
Now, while the president is rightfully critical of the one-sided partisan witch hunt, while members of the media missing in action, they have become Robert Mueller's biggest cheerleaders, night after night after night, over a year and a half. Conspiracy TV, MSNBC, fake news, CNN, leading with breathless speculation about Trump-Russia collusion. And it's not happening. Avoiding the biggest corruption, abuse of power scandal in history that we have laid out for you. And by the way, Lindsey Graham on this program, very willing to have full investigations and perhaps even a special counsel, considering that's all the Democrats in the House want to do for the next 2 years. So instead of these networks putting facts first, they've been waging a PR lie campaign against the man that they never wanted to be president. But they call themselves journalists on these networks. So it's no surprise that many so-called reporters replaced actual journalism with anti-Trump vitriol every second, every minute, every hour of every day in some cases. And by the way, especially true of Jim Acosta. Day after day, he made a mockery of these press briefings, trying to prop himself up. Instead of asking questions, he engaged in debate with the president or Sarah Sanders, insults, fundamental rudeness. Instead of seeking answers, asking tough questions, bashing the administration with statements. He replaced reporting with grandstanding. And earlier this month, Acosta's unprofessional behavior, well, that culminated in this confrontation where he actually made, if you can see right there, he wouldn't even give the White House intern back the microphone, refused to turn over the microphone to the intern after the president had to say enough. How many times does a president have to say to one reporter, enough, 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 enough? Between them, if I was one of the other reporters waiting to ask a question, I think I'd be ticked off. Anyway, following that incident, subsequent ban from the White House, Jim Acosta now has regained his hard pass. But let's remind you of some of his past behavior.
news
Not you.
organization.
Not
Can
you.
you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are
is
attacking
terrible.
our news organization.
Your organization
Can you
is
give us a
terrible.
chance to
Let's
ask
go.
a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you
Quiet.
state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's asking a
categorically,
question. Don't
Mr.
be
President-elect, can you give us a question?
be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question? I'm not sure this press conference was ever on the rails. As you heard numerous times during this news conference, the president was just not in touch with reality. The president just seems to harbor some deep-seated racial attitudes about people of color coming in from other parts of the world. It's like we're just covering bad reality television is what it feels like now. I think at times this White House has an unhealthy fixation on what I call the 3 M's, the Mexicans, the Muslims, and the media. If you don't mind, after I'm finished, if Ouija or Hallie or Vivian or one of our female colleagues could go after me, that would be great. Mr. President, just to follow up on these allegations against Brett Kavanaugh.
What does he mean by that? Explain.
I'm going to move on. David, go ahead.
The president's tone
Jim,
towards
I'm
the press.
finished. Thank you.
The president's tone towards the press obviously is not helpful at times,
you,
and I think
Jim.
that that's plain to see.
It's part of the
Wall,
negotiation that we expect Congress to have.
But you understand Democrats are saying that they may not be in favor of this kind of deal. That they say thanks, but no thanks for a wall.
Jim, I'm not negotiating with you. I'm going to let Congress take care of that.
Liberty
Jim,
has always
Jim,
been
let me ask you a question.
of hope to the world.
Jim,
for people to send
Jim, do you believe
people to this country?
Jim,
and they're not always going to speak
Jim,
English, Stephen.
Jim,
they're not
do you
always
believe
going to be highly skilled. They're not always going to be.
Jim, I appreciate your speech.
I think we saw the president's true colors today, and I'm not sure they were red, white, and blue.
Oh, they're not red, white, and blue. Great for Jim, Mr. Objective Reporter, to decide. Now, the irony here is the great boomerang that may have happened. Why? Because now, as a result of the court ruling, didn't talk about the First Amendment, talked about the Fifth Amendment, due process. But anyway, I have here a list of all of the qualifications and new standards that every reporter has to meet if they want to stay in the White House. And people will be given that due process. That means they may have ultimately made it easier to kick out people that refuse to abide by the decorum of having the honor to work in that house. Be as tough as you want, but it's not about you. It's not about having a debate with the President of the United States. So while Acosta's hard pass has been restored, he now faces new White House rules aimed at curtailing unprofessional behavior. That sounds fair to me. First, a journalist called upon to ask a question will ask a single question and then will yield the floor to the other individuals in there. Second, at the discretion of the president or other White House officials taking questions, a follow-up question may or may not be permitted, and where a follow-up has been allowed and asked, the questioner will then yield the floor. Third, yielding the floor includes, when applicable, physically surrendering the microphone to White House staff for use by the next questioner. And fourth, failure to abide by any of the rules 1 through 3 may result in suspension or the revoking of the journalist's hard pass. Now, it's important to remember, freedom of the press does not guarantee freedom to the White House grounds. Now, there is no law regulating the president's access to the press. They don't even have to do press conferences, which brings us to a Hannity history lesson tonight. For most of American history, there was no press corps inside the White House. Now, the McKinley administration was the first to communicate with the press on a consistent basis, and he used them to bolster public support for the Spanish-American War. But formal press conferences, they didn't take place until the Woodrow Wilson administration, and the first press secretary took office in 1929. And get this, press conferences were all off the record until the Eisenhower administration. Now, the White House briefing room, that wasn't constructed until 1970. It's actually built over a pool, and the pool still exists. So it's important to remember, despite the constant stream of negative coverage, President Trump has granted a historic level of access to the press. His briefings are incredibly long, some lasting for well over an hour as the president fields dozens and dozens of questions. A New York Times photographer recently said that Trump provides more access than the Obama administration. Now, the White House correspondent from CBS echoed those remarks that, quote, we see him all the time. Now the president has a new strategy for dealing with Acosta, and frankly, those rules will be applied to everybody equally as they now try to turn his briefings into a circus. Take a look.
We'll have rules of decorum. You know, you can't keep asking questions. We had a lot of reporters in that room, many reporters in that room, and they were unable to ask questions because this guy gets up and starts, doing what he's supposed to be doing for him and for CNN and, just shouting out questions. But I will say this, look, nobody believes in the First Amendment more than I do. And if I think somebody's acting out of sorts, I will leave. I'll say, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you coming, and I'll leave. And those reporters will not be too friendly to whoever it is that's acting up.
All right, so we'll continue to monitor the new White House press strategy as it unfolds. But now we have good news to start with here. The Florida recount is finally over. Andrew Gillum, Bill Nelson have now finally conceded. Rick Scott, the governor, is now the senator-elect from the great state of Florida. Ron DeSantis, congressman, will be Florida's next governor. And tonight, we don't yet know the cost of this year's Florida recount, but just 18 years ago, the 2000, that recount cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. Now, the colossal bill to taxpayers is not the only fallout from this year's Florida election mayhem. Broward County Supervisor of Elections, Brenda Snipes, she has now officially resigned from her post. Frankly, it's about time. She came under heavy fire after magically finding, tens of thousands of votes days after day after day after the election. And, of course, mixing dozens of invalid ballots with 200 valid ones. Her staff accidentally leaving a box of blank ballots in a rental car at an airport, and she missed her state's recount deadline by 2 minutes, invalidating the results that would have given another almost 800 votes to Rick Scott. Criminal investigation is now ongoing. Meanwhile, in the state of Georgia tonight, the election chaos does somewhat continue there. Now, Stacey Abrams refusing to officially concede last week, although she's acknowledged there's no real path to victory, also refusing to say that Brian Kemp is the legitimate governor of the great state of Georgia. Take a look.
Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the person who won an adequate number of votes
but that's
to become the governor of
with all due respect, and I respect where you're coming from, and I respect the issues that you're raising. You're not answering the question. Do you think it was? You're not using the word legitimate. Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the legal governor of Georgia.
Legal, legitimate, conceded. You know what? Sounds sore loserish. Not good for anyone's future and political ambitions. So while Abrams tries to uproot the will of the voters in Georgia, we still have 2 U.S. House races that are still undecided. They're looking good for the Republicans. Mia Love in Utah, up about by 1,500. Robert Woodall, a little below 500. Looks like both of them leading in those races. All told, Democrats picked up, according to Fox News, 37 seats in the House. That is nothing compared to Presidents Obama and Clinton. Look at this. 2010, Obama's first midterm, well, Democrats lost 63 House seats and 6 seats in the Senate. In 94, under Bill Clinton, his first midterm, Democrats lost 52 seats in the House, 8 in the Senate. So much for the blue wave. There is one critical Mississippi Senate race runoff coming up. The left is pulling out all the stops there to derail Cindy Hyde-Smith's chances in her runoff election. But Trump is hitting the stump. He'll be out in Mississippi next Monday for a rally. And now that Trump is campaigning for her, the Democrats will only pull out even more dirty tactics for that crucial Senate race. We'll stay tuned to that. But if you think about it, well, if the president didn't go so often to Florida and Tennessee and Missouri and Indiana and North Dakota, and he'll be going to Mississippi, could we have had a very different result? Compare his first midterm to that of Obama and Clinton, and basically, pretty good night for the president. Now, we have to turn now to the horrific wildfires that continue to rip through the state of California tonight. This is horrible. The statewide death toll is now up to 80 people, and we have nearly 1,000 Californians missing. The devastation, as you can see, and the level of damage is beyond shocking. Billions and billions of dollars in damage, and the personal toll is beyond any description. This could and should have been prevented. Look at what the Wall Street Journal reported in their editorial board. Federal, state environmental protections have left California's drought-impacted forests vulnerable to these fires. Get this, in a 7-year period, 130 million trees have died in 7 years. The government is preventing them from being cleared. Well, how does that help stop forest fires? And according to the Journal, quote, the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act have hampered tree clearing, controlled burns, timber sales on federal lands. And the article goes on, quote, California also restricts timber harvesting, requires myriad permits and environmental impact statements to prune overgrown forests. Controlled maintenance in California's forests have got to now be a top priority. This has happened year in and year out. And the president, by the way, went to California this weekend. He and Jerry Brown are in agreement. The regulations need to change. The forests must be controlled and properly maintained so we can prevent loss of life, damaged property, lives uprooted. The government has to get off people's backs, and they have to come up with common sense policies so they can protect their state, their people, their homes, their families with better forest management. These fires cause far worse environmental damage than a controlled burn or timber excavation. And as I've said before, human lives, of course, are irreplaceable. And we do pray tonight, everyone in California, for all of them. Many people suffering tonight, many people scared, worried. They don't know where their families are. 1,000 missing people, 80 dead. When we come back, a live report on the migrant caravan, a huge showdown as we speak in Tijuana, Mexico. Plus, the former head of ICE, Tammy Bruce will be here to discuss the crisis on the border as this and much more continues. We're glad you picked Fox. We're glad you're watching Hannity. All right, joining us now with the very latest update on the migrant caravan that has now made our way to our southern border. Fox News Los Angeles correspondent Trace Gallagher is with us. Trace, a few thousand people now in Tijuana. Things look very tense.
Yeah, and at the border, Sean, people carried signs saying no to illegals and no to the invasion. These were signs carried by Mexican citizens in Tijuana who made it clear the Central American caravan is not welcome in their city. Watch.
I'm not really in favor of them coming the way they did. You know, to me, it feels like they invaded, and that was not the correct way. But I know all of them are not like that.
The icy reception came as a shock to many in the caravan who say up to now the Mexican people have treated them well. But even the local mayor who wore a Make Tijuana Great Again hat said he might consider a referendum to force the migrants to move on. Otherwise, they could be here for a while. There are currently 6,000 migrants waiting for entry into the U.S. That's a 2 to 3 month wait just for an asylum interview. Plus, an additional 7,000 to 8,000 migrants are moving toward Tijuana. For now, Mexico is providing a stadium for shelter along with bed pads, food, and showers. But the government says it does not have the resources for long-term shelter. And today, for the first time, the U.S. shut down the San Ysidro port of entry near San Diego, fearing a large number of migrants were planning to rush the border. But with miles of new razor wire fence, a full contingent of Border Patrol agents and military members getting into the U.S. will not be easy, although some U.S. troops have finished their duties and could start coming home this week. Finally, we should note DHS said today more than 500 criminals are traveling with the migrant caravans, and that most of the caravan is made up of single adult or teenage males. Sean.
All right, Trace Gallagher in Los Angeles tonight. Thank you. Also, as President Trump tries to secure our southern border, Democrats continue to demonize agents. And Senator Kamala Harris said this just last week at the confirmation hearing for Trump's pick to lead ICE. Take a look at this outrage.
Klan was what we would call today a domestic terrorist group.
Why? Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and force?
It was based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between sworn
I'm talking about perception.
Officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel.
The perception of ICE being the KKK? Here with reaction, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce and former acting ICE director, Fox News contributor Thomas Homan is with us. I don't know how you react to react to Kamala Harris, sir, but number one, I like your reaction, and number two, I think more importantly, you see what's beginning to boil over in Tijuana, and I don't see any good answers here. And the people in Mexico using Donald Trump's verbiage, language, the feeling that this is an invasion, and it comes at a great cost to them because their borders were not respected, their laws not respected.
Well, first of all, on Kamala Harris, what she did was disgusting. I mean, she compared the 20,000 men and women of ICE, the same men and women that leave the safety and security of their home every day, strap a gun to their hip and defend this nation. To compare them to such a hate group is just disgusting. And you know, and for her as a U.S. senator to make that comparison, when her herself needed to look in the mirror, she failed the American people. ICE is enforcing the laws that Congress enacted. They're not making this up. So if she would have done her job and closed the loopholes that cause illegal immigration, we wouldn't have this caravan today. So shame on her. And I've said it once before, she should go walk to the National Law Enforcement Memorial and apologize to all the fallen Border Patrol agents and ICE agents that gave their lives for this country. She is disgusting on what she did. As far as what's going on in Tijuana, as far as what's going on in Tijuana, look, we got a great president. We got a president that takes border security seriously. We got a president that believes in the sovereignty in this country. We got a president that believes in the rule of law. We got a president that supports the Border Patrol and ICE. He's doing his job. So what's going on in Mexico, as you said, Sean, they're waking up. Their country, had their sovereignty's been attacked. These people went through their southern border, assaulted their federal officers and their military. Mexico is finally saying enough's enough. And the reason this is coming to a head because President Trump has taken power. He said, you know what? Our border's closed for illegal business. So what he's done is force this caravan to be stuck in Tijuana. He put this issue on front burner. He's a great he's been right on everything he's done on this border. And I'm certainly glad he's there. And now everybody's talking about it, and we're going to be successful in this.
You know, Tammy, you got protesters in Tijuana erupting. Trump was right. This is an invasion. 500 criminals, our Department of Homeland Security point out, have mixed in with those that perhaps just want a better life, which I'm assuming Mexico's not prepared to deal with any of this. And now it's gotten to the point we've got thousands of people and no place to go, which was being laughed at by people like Barack Obama and Democrats before the election. This is just fear-mongering. Apparently, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, it doesn't. And look, a lot of those people, we think it's possible, moved to try to access the United States through Tijuana because the drug cartels are unhappy because of the most rudimentary steps we've actually taken. Razor wire, some, impediments at the border to keep people from being able to come over has affected the ability to move drugs into the country. Imagine the success we'd have if there was a wall. 64,000 deaths from heroin and other opioid overdoses, but primarily heroin in this country in 2016. 64,000 dead Americans. At the very least, that's the reason why we should secure the border in this regard. And regarding Kamala Harris, speaking about the drug trafficking into the interior, ICE is the organization that saves lives, that protects the lives of the immigrant communities, legal and illegal. It doesn't matter. When they deal with MS-13, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking, the efforts to kidnap children, to force them into the gangs, to force them into drug abuse, it is ICE that gets the criminals who are stopping that activity. And for Kamala Harris to suggest that those individuals who risk their lives to save the lives of the immigrant communities and also the lives of people in the urban areas is obscene, and it highlights the fraud that the Democrats are now, and especially the women who are claiming to be feminists leading that party. They are condemning girls and women in the process of this rhetoric to create more divisions. We should all reject it.
All right, powerful. Tammy, thank you. Thomas, thank you. All right, a lot more news tonight. President Trump taking matters now into his own hands about the questions Mueller wants to answer. Sarah Carter, Greg Jarrett, Alan Dershowitz also tonight. Hollywood threatening to boycott the state of Georgia. You won't believe the ridiculous reason why. Duck Dynasty's Willie Robertson, Dan Bongino, all coming up as we continue.
Is preparing written answers to questions about...
No, not my team. I'm preparing written answers. I'm the one that does the answer. Yes. Are they writing them out?
Yes.
Yeah, they're writing what I tell them to write.
Are they going to be submitted?
At some point very soon, yes. I've completed them.
So you are submitting...
And it wasn't a big deal. By the way, it wasn't a big deal. The questions were asked and answered. It wasn't a big deal. You know, they make it like I had meetings for many, many hours. I got the questions, I responded, we wrote them out, I read them once, I read them a second time, we made some changes, that's it. They're very simple. You know why? I did nothing wrong.
President Trump this weekend on Fox News Sunday discussing the written answers that he will provide to the Mueller investigation. Is this now the beginning of the end? Here with reaction. He's the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Russia Hoax, The Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton, Frame Donald Trump, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett, the author of another bestseller, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, Alan Dershowitz, and Fox News contributor Sarah Carter. Let me start with you, Greg, with a series of questions. Okay. Did you collude with the Russians? No. Do you know anybody who colluded with the Russians? No. Did you know about what the WikiLeaks was going to release? Right. No. I mean, what else is there to ask? Because it's only about that, not about obstruction.
Yeah, you're right. Anything he did after he took office plus obstruction is off the table, which means there really are a limited number of questions. Frankly, it should have taken about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. He might be questioned about the Trump Tower meeting. Did you know in advance about it? Not that I recall. That's what he has said ad nauseum. Look, 1.4 million documents were provided by the White House. 20 people, including 4 members of the White House counsel's office, were made available to Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Additional individuals from the campaign were also made available. So, and this president has been very open and has voiced his sentiments about this. So, frankly, Mueller knows everything.
You know, let me go to you, Professor Dershowitz, because in many ways, this is good news because we had discussed the possibility of a subpoena fight, the president having to go before a grand jury. Would have been, I think, bad for the country. Yep. You have been very outspoken about it. I think you were right on that. And I also have to believe that we did actually have all that we discovered about a fixed investigation into Hillary. In other words, they were writing the exoneration. They never interviewed her months before. They were writing the exoneration. Then, of course, the fraudulent Russian dossier that was leaked to the American people to influence the election and then used later to help discredit and delegitimize Donald Trump's victory. There is Russia information that they ignored here, which shows to me a bias, a complete double standard.
Well, I think the most, the striking example of the bias is Rod Rosenstein still being in charge of the investigation. He is the crucial, the main witness for the defense. If there's any discussion at all in the report of any allegation of obstruction of justice, the defense is what Rod Rosenstein said it was okay. He told me to do it. It was his idea. He wrote the memo. How can you both be in charge of the investigation and the main witness for the defense? As far as the written questions are concerned, what I think is going to happen once the questions are submitted is the Mueller team will go through them with a fine-tooth comb and see if there's any contradictions the witnesses, because the whole purpose of having him answer questions, whether orally or in writing, is a perjury trap. And I think the written questions make it much, much harder for President Trump to fall into any kind of a perjury trap. And remember, you can fall into a perjury trap even if you tell the complete truth. All you need is somebody who contradicts you, who a prosecutor believes, and then you're in the perjury trap.
And Sarah, from a news standpoint, does that mean... I think Lindsey Graham was pretty clear in saying that, you know, the Hillary email investigation might then begin again, especially if the Democrats want to spend the next 2 years investigating this for the 400th year. But then it raises what happens to Comey? What happens to McCabe? What happens to Bruce Orr, Christopher Steele? What happens to Strzok and Page? What about the media leak strategy? What about the insurance policy? What about Clinton should win 100 million to 0? In terms of the race against Donald Trump, all of which we now have evidence of, on top of, will we get to see the FISA warrants, Gang of 8 information, the 302s, Bruce Orr with Christopher Steele?
Well, and now there's a fourth bucket that Devin Nunes has talked about. You know, he's going to be wrapping up his chairmanship, and he's talked about a set of emails, basically a set of emails that prove that people within the FBI and DOJ knowingly withheld information from the FISA courts. So this is very important. Not only do we, and I think America wants to see transparency here with the FISA warrant, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance warrant, the Bruce Orr interviews, those 302s that you mentioned, Sean, as well as the Gang of Eight notebook. But now there is a fourth bucket. And not only that, I don't think that they're going to back away. I truly believe that all of the evidence that's come out over the last 2 years, particularly directed at the FBI and DOJ, those senior level officials, as well as Hillary Clinton, as well as the information we found out about Stefan Halper, you know, the professor, and working with, you know, basically with the FBI, and Bruce Orr, basically being the back. And George Papadopoulos. Yeah, absolutely. This is all going to move forward.
Professor, let me ask you, because I think this is really, really important. If there was a fraud committed on the FISA court to get into a backdoor way to a Trump campaign associate and all prior contacts, information, emails included, and they purposely withheld information and gave the FISA court unverified, uncorroborated information, I got to imagine as a civil libertarian, you take that case, you run with it, you bring it to the Supreme Court, it's 9-0, Dershowitz wins.
Well, I think that there is great concern about how the FISA court operates. And there's now, I think, a lot of consensus that the FISA court has to be restructured. They should have a permanent group of defense attorneys with security clearance who can be there to challenge anything presented by the government to the FISA court. So that, for example, in this case, a defense attorney would say, what is the basis of this? How did you get it? Did you check it? Did you validate it?
They didn't.
You know, and they didn't do any of that, and that should be done.
And they withheld, Greg, I'll give you the last word, they withheld pertinent information.
It's a fraud on the court to conceal evidence and deceive the judges. And the tragedy here is that there were never any hearings by the FISA judges. They simply accepted as truthful from the FBI and the Department of Justice that which wasn't truthful.
So is it going to be that they're going to probably land this airplane in a way that they hope, Sarah, that the investigations into the deep state end? Is that their hope? That they want prosecutorial discretion applied everywhere?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is their hope. And I think we have a lot more coming in the future, Sean. I know there's a lot more information out there and indictments on the way.
Well, I'll tell you, the great news is that conservatives are becoming civil libertarians now, because the ACLU is dead in the water. With all due respect, I've always been a civil libertarian for the last 20 years. So I think it's very important.
All right.
It is.
Good to see you all. This is going to get interesting. All right, when we come back, Duck Dynasty's Willie Robertson, Dan Bongino, Hollywood in the Trump era. You won't believe the latest. That's straight ahead.